At Seattle rate to 20 hours on June 4, 1942, Ensign Albert Ernest pushed his TBF-1 Avenger into a shallow dive toward the Japanese carrier fleet 150 miles northwest of Midway Island. Behind him, 5 more Avengers from VT-8 detachment followed in loose formation, each carrying a Mark 13 torpedo weighing 2,216 pounds. They were the newest aircraft in the Navy's inventory, having arrived at Midway only 3 days earlier. None of the pilots had more than 20 hours in type. Now they were attacking the most powerful carrier force in the Pacific. At turtle weight 25 hours, Japanese fighters found them. Zeros tore through the formation cannon shells, ripping through aluminum skin and hydraulic lines. Ernest felt his aircraft shudder as rounds struck the fuselage. His turret gunner, aviation radio man Harry Ferrier, fired back with the .50 caliber gun until a cannon shell exploded in the turret, wounding him severely. The ventral gunner, aviation machinist mate J. Manning, died instantly when 20mm rounds tore through the belly position. Ernest's hydraulic system failed, his elevator control was damaged, oil pressure was dropping. But he was still flying and still had his torpedo. At 8:30 hours, he released at 800 yards from a Japanese carrier, pulled up through intense anti-aircraft fire, and turned for Midway. Behind him, the other 5 Avengers were shot down. Of 6 aircraft and 18 crew members, only Ernest and the wounded Ferrier survived. But Ernest's TBF-1 serial number 00380 made it back to Midway with over 70 holes, 1 dead crew member, 1 wounded, hydraulics destroyed, and elevator controls barely functioning. Ernest landed wheels up because his landing gear wouldn't extend. The aircraft slid to a stop on the runway. Ground crews counted the holes and wondered how the Avenger had flown at all. The answer was simple: Grumman built it to survive. This was the Avenger's introduction to combat. 5 of 6 aircraft lost, 16 of 18 crew members killed, 0 hits on enemy ships. By any measure, a disaster. But the one aircraft that survived demonstrated what would make the Avenger the most successful torpedo bomber of World War II. It could absorb catastrophic damage and keep flying. That survivability, combined with range, payload, and versatility, would make the TBF the backbone of carrier air groups for the rest of the war. The story of the Avenger began with the disaster that preceded it. On June 4, 1942, the same day, Ernest flew his desperate mission from Midway. 41 Douglas TBD Devastator torpedo bombers attacked the Japanese carrier fleet from Enterprise Hornet and Yorktown. The Devastators were slow, unmaneuverable, and lightly armed. Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft fire destroyed 35 of 41 aircraft. Of 126 aircrew, only 6 survived. The TBD was obsolete, and everyone knew it. The Navy had known since 1939 that the TBD needed replacement. In April 1940, the Bureau of Aeronautics issued specifications for a new torpedo bomber, 3-man crew, maximum speed over 300 miles per hour, range of 1,000 miles, with torpedo and defensive armament sufficient to survive fighter attack. The aircraft had to operate from carriers, meaning it needed folding wings, strong landing gear, and a resting hook. Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation submitted a design designated XTBF-1. Chief Engineer William Schwendler and his team created a mid-wing monoplane with internal bomb bay powered by a single Wright R2608 Cyclone, 14-cylinder radial engine producing 1,700 horsepower. The design was ambitious, the largest single-engine aircraft Grumman had built, heavier than any previous carrier aircraft, with more armament and equipment than contemporary designs. The prototype XTBF-1 first flew on August 7, 1941, piloted by Grumman test pilot Robert Hall. The aircraft handled well despite its size and weight. Maximum speed reached 278 miles per hour at 12,000 feet, exceeding specification requirements. The Navy was impressed and ordered 286 production aircraft in December 1941, even before carrier qualification trials were complete. The production TBF-1 was 40 feet long with a 54-foot wingspan. When the wings folded, width reduced to 19 feet for carrier storage. Height was 16 feet 5 inches. Empty weight was 1080 pounds. Maximum loaded weight was 15,905 pounds, making the Avenger substantially heavier than the TBD it replaced. The Wright R2608 engine drove a three-blade constant-speed propeller, 13 feet 1 inch in diameter. Performance reflected the aircraft's size and weight. Maximum speed was 278 miles per hour at 12,000 feet. Cruising speed was 153 miles per hour. Service ceiling was 23,400 feet. Range was 215 miles with maximum fuel or 530 miles with a torpedo. Rate of climb was 30 feet per minute. These numbers were adequate but not exceptional. The Avenger was not designed for speed or agility. It was designed to deliver torpedoes and survive. The internal bomb bay was the Avenger's most distinctive feature. Previous torpedo bombers carried torpedoes externally, creating drag and limiting performance. The Avenger's bomb bay was 63 inches wide and 10 feet long, large enough to accommodate a Mark 13 torpedo 4, 500-pound bombs or various combinations of smaller bombs and depth charges. Hydraulically operated doors opened downward, the torpedo or bombs released, and doors closed, restoring the aircraft's streamlined shape. Defensive armament was substantial. A .30 caliber machine gun was mounted in the nose, fired by the pilot. A .50 caliber machine gun was mounted in a Grumman-designed dorsal turret operated by the turret gunner who sat behind the pilot. A .30 caliber ventral gun pointed downward and rearward from the belly, operated by the radio man who also handled navigation and radio communication. The three-man crew worked in close proximity. The pilot sat under a large canopy, providing excellent visibility. The turret gunner sat directly behind the pilot in the powered turret, scanning for fighters. The radio man ventral gunner occupied a compartment behind and below the turret, operating radio equipment, manning the ventral gun and assisting with navigation. Communication between crew members was via intercom, essential for coordinating defensive fire and navigation. The cockpit was spacious compared to fighters but cramped compared to multi-engine bombers. The instrument panel contained standard flight instruments, engine gauges, and radio equipment. The torpedo release mechanism was electrically operated with backup manual release. The bomb sight was a simple Mark 15 mechanical sight, adequate for level bombing, but requiring skill for accurate delivery. The first production TBF-1s were delivered to VT-8 in March 1942, just 3 months before Midway. The squadron split, with most aircraft deploying aboard USS Hornet, while a detachment of 6 aircraft deployed to Midway Island. These 6 aircraft, including Ernest 0380, would be the first Avengers in combat. The disaster at Midway on June 4, 1942, where 5 of 6 Avengers were lost, could have doomed the aircraft before it proved itself. But Navy leadership recognized that the losses reflected mission circumstances rather than aircraft deficiencies. The Avengers had attacked without fighter escort against overwhelming opposition. Any torpedo bomber would have suffered similar losses. What mattered was that Ernest's aircraft survived 70 hits and flew home. Production accelerated dramatically after Midway. Grumman's Bethpage, New York factory produced TBF-1s at increasing rates through 1942. But demand exceeded Grumman's capacity because the company was also producing F-6F Hellcat fighters. The Navy contracted General Motors to produce Avengers at their Eastern Aircraft Division plants in New Jersey. These aircraft were designated TBM, identical to TBF except for manufacturer designation. By August 1942, Enterprise, Saratoga, and Wasp all operated Avenger squadrons. The aircraft began replacing TBD Devastators throughout the fleet. At the Battle of the Eastern Solomons on August 24, 1942, Avengers from Enterprise and Saratoga attacked the Japanese carrier Ryujo. The results were better than Midway. Avengers hit Ryujo with multiple torpedoes and bombs, contributing to her sinking. Several Avengers were damaged, but all returned to their carriers. The pattern continued through subsequent battles. At Santa Cruz on October 26, 1942, Avengers damaged the carrier Zuiho. At Guadalcanal in November 1942, Avengers attacked Japanese battleships, bombarding Henderson Field, damaging battleship Himoats. At Rennell Island in January 1943, Avengers attacked Japanese cruisers, evacuating troops from Guadalcanal. In each action, Avengers proved capable of delivering ordnance accurately and surviving intense defensive fire. The aircraft's survivability came from several design features. The airframe was overbuilt with redundant structural members. Self-sealing fuel tanks surrounded by armor reduced fire risk when hit. The radial engine could run with several cylinders shot out. Critical control cables were duplicated, so damage to one cable didn't cause control loss. The large size meant that hits in non-critical areas caused damage without compromising flight capability. Pilots and crews developed confidence in the Avenger's toughness. They knew the aircraft could bring them home despite damage that would down lighter aircraft. That confidence translated into more aggressive attacks, closer approaches to targets, and willingness to press through defensive fire. The psychological advantage of knowing your aircraft was tough was difficult to quantify but real. By mid-1943, Avenger tactics had evolved beyond torpedo attacks. The aircraft's bomb bay capacity made it excellent for level bombing against the shore installations, shipping, and ground targets. Avengers bombed Japanese bases at Rabaul Truck and other strongholds. They attacked Japanese shipping throughout the Pacific, sinking hundreds of cargo ships, transports, and warships. The most important evolution was the Avengers' role in anti-submarine warfare. German U-boats in the Atlantic were sinking merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. The Navy needed aircraft capable of long-range patrol submarine detection and attack. The Avenger proved ideal for this mission. TBF-1Cs and TBM-1Cs were modified for anti-submarine warfare. Radar was installed in a pod under the right wing. Radio direction finding equipment was added. Bomb bay was configured to carry depth charges or acoustic homing torpedoes. The combination of long-range heavy payload and radar detection capability made the Avenger the most effective anti-submarine aircraft in the Atlantic. Escort carriers carrying Avengers hunted U-boats across the Atlantic through 1943 and 1944. Hunter-killer groups combined a small carrier with destroyer escorts, providing both air and surface anti-submarine capability. Avengers would locate submarines using radar vector destroyers to the contact and attack with depth charges or torpedoes. The tactics proved devastatingly effective. In 1943-44, Avengers from escort carriers sank or contributed to sinking 53 German and Japanese submarines. The aircraft's radar could detect submarines on the surface at night or in bad weather when visual detection was impossible. Once detected, submarines had little chance of escape. Avengers could remain on station for hours, tracking submarines and guiding surface ships to attack positions. One notable success came on June 4, 1944, when Avengers from escort carrier USS Guadalcanal forced German submarine U-505 to surface. Destroyers captured the submarine intact, providing intelligence material including code books and an Enigma machine. The capture was one of the most significant intelligence coups of the Atlantic War, and it was made possible by Avenger radar detection and attack. In the Pacific, Avengers evolved into night attack aircraft. Modified TBF-1Ds and TBM-3Ds carried radar in the wing pod and operated from carriers at night, attacking Japanese shipping and installations. Night Avenger squadrons became highly specialized, developing tactics for radar navigation, radar-guided attacks, and night carrier landings that were among the most dangerous operations in naval aviation. The night operations required exceptional skill. Landing on a carrier at night with minimal visual references was difficult in any aircraft. Landing a heavy torpedo bomber on a pitching carrier deck in darkness required precision that only experienced pilots could achieve. Night Avenger squadrons lost many aircraft and crews to operational accidents, but the capability to attack at night gave carriers 24-hour strike capability. By 1944, the TBM-3 variant entered service with more powerful R2620 engine, producing 900 horsepower and improved equipment. The TBM-3E added wing-mounted rocket rails, allowing the Avenger to carry 8 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets in addition to internal ordnance. The HVAR was extremely effective against ships' ground targets and submarines, expanding the Avenger's versatility further. During the Philippine Campaign in 1944, Avengers struck Japanese shipping throughout the islands. They sank battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and hundreds of merchant vessels. At the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, Avengers contributed to sinking battleship Musashi and damaged numerous other Japanese ships. The attacks demonstrated that mass torpedo and bomb strikes from Avengers could overwhelm even the heaviest ships. At Okinawa in 1945, Avengers flew thousands of sorties against Japanese positions, kamikaze staging bases, and shipping. They operated in terrible weather, often flying through rain and low clouds to deliver close air support for ground forces. They attacked kamikaze aircraft on the ground before they could launch. They bombed caves and fortifications that ground forces could not reduce with artillery. The Avengers' versatility made it invaluable. A single aircraft type could deliver torpedoes, bombs, depth charges, or rockets, depending on mission requirements. A squadron could conduct torpedo attacks in the morning, anti-submarine patrols in the afternoon, and night attacks in the evening. No other aircraft offered such flexibility. Production totaled 9 839 aircraft, 2 291 TBF built by Grumman, and 7 546 TBM built by General Motors. This made the Avenger one of the most produced American naval aircraft. The high production rate reflected both heavy losses and the aircraft's importance to carrier operations. Every fleet carrier and escort carrier operated Avenger squadrons by 1944. Loss rates were significant, but not catastrophic. Approximately 500 Avengers were lost in combat, giving a combat loss rate of about 15%. This was higher than fighters, but lower than the TBD Devastators they replaced. The losses reflected the dangerous missions. Avengers flew low-level torpedo attacks, anti-submarine patrols in bad weather, and close air support in the face of heavy ground fire. The three-man crew arrangement meant that losses were measured not just in aircraft, but in lives. Each Avenger lost meant 3 trained aircrew killed or captured. The crews formed tight bonds because their survival depended on each man performing perfectly. Pilots trusted their gunners to spot attacking fighters. Gunners trusted pilots to fly the aircraft through flak. Radio men trusted both to get them home safely. Some crews flew dozens of missions together, developing almost telepathic coordination. They knew each other's voices, habits, and thinking. They covered each other's mistakes and compensated for each other's weaknesses. When one crew member was lost, replacing him felt like betrayal to survivors. Many pilots refused to fly with new crew members after their original gunner or radio man was killed. After World War II, the Avenger continued serving in several roles. The Navy used Avengers for anti-submarine warfare, airborne early warning, and utility transport into the 1950s. This aircraft's size and load capacity made it useful for missions that newer, faster aircraft couldn't perform. Some Avengers were converted to electronic warfare platforms with special equipment for radar jamming and intelligence gathering. Several foreign navies operated Avengers through the 1950s and 1960s. The Royal Navy received hundreds through Lend-Lease and operated them during and after the war. Canada, France, Japan, Netherlands, and New Zealand all flew Avengers in various roles. The Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force operated Avengers until 1961, a remarkable example of former enemies using American equipment. Civilian operators used Avengers for forest fire, fighting agricultural spraying, and cargo transport. The large bomb bay made the aircraft ideal for carrying water or fire retardant. Modified Avengers operated as aerial tankers fighting forest fires in the American West and Canada for decades. The last civilian Avenger was retired from firefighting service in the 1990s, over 50 years after the type's first flight. One Avenger achieved lasting fame not through combat, but through disappearance. On December 5, 1945, 5 TBM Avengers from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale disappeared during a training flight over the Atlantic. Flight 19, as the mission was designated, became one of aviation's most famous mysteries. The aircraft and 14 crew members were never found, spawning decades of speculation about the Bermuda Triangle and other supernatural explanations. The truth was almost certainly less mysterious. Navigational error and deteriorating weather led the flight far from land. Fuel exhaustion forced water landings, and the heavy Avengers sank quickly in rough seas. But the mystery persists because the aircraft were never found. Flight 19 remains the Avenger's most famous incident, even though it reflects operational accident rather than combat loss. Today, approximately 140 Avengers survive in museums and private collections. Several are maintained in flying condition, operated by organizations like the Commemorative Air Force and private collectors. Maintaining 80-year-old torpedo bombers requires dedication, expertise, and substantial financial resources. But owners persevere because the Avenger represents an important era in naval aviation. The Avenger's legacy is its versatility and survivability. No other World War II torpedo bomber combined range, payload, defensive armament, and structural strength in one airframe. The Avenger could attack ships with torpedoes, bomb shore installations, hunt submarines, provide close air support, and conduct reconnaissance. It performed every mission competently and survived operational conditions that destroyed lesser aircraft. The comparison with the TBD Devastator it replaced is stark. At Midway, 35 of 41 Devastators were shot down in one day. Throughout the war, Avengers achieved approximately 85% survival rate, despite flying similar missions against similar defenses. The difference was structural strength, better defensive armament, and superior performance. The Avenger gave crews a fighting chance. The Devastator did not. But the Avenger's success came with costs measured in lives. Over 1,000 Avengers were lost in combat. Each loss meant 3 crew members killed or captured, approximately 3,000 deaths total. The men who flew Avengers knew the risks. Torpedo attacks required flying straight and level toward heavily defended targets while under fire from fighters and anti-aircraft guns. The courage required to maintain course while comrades were shot down around them was extraordinary. On that morning of June 4, 1942, when Ensign Ernest flew his damaged Avenger back to Midway with a wounded gunner and dead radio man, when he landed wheels up on the runway, with hydraulics shot out and controls barely functioning, he was demonstrating what made the Avenger special. The aircraft could survive catastrophic damage and bring its crew home. That survival capability, more than speed or armament or any other specification, defined the Avenger's contribution. The name was chosen deliberately. The TBF was designated Avenger in October 1941 before Pearl Harbor. After December 7, 1941, the name took on additional meaning. The aircraft would avenge American losses at Pearl Harbor and subsequent battles. That symbolism motivated crews throughout the war. They flew Avengers not just as weapons platforms, but as instruments of vengeance against an enemy that had struck first. Whether that motivation translated into better combat performance is unknowable, but it created esprit de corps among Avenger squadrons. They knew they flew the Navy's primary strike aircraft, the bomber that could hit hard and survive to hit again. They took pride in their aircraft's toughness and their own skill. That pride sustained them through campaigns from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, through losses that accumulated over 4 years, through exhaustion and fear and the grinding stress of combat operations. The Avenger was not beautiful. It was large, heavy, utilitarian. The bent wings and bulbous fuselage lacked the aesthetic grace of fighters like the Corsair or Hellcat. But beauty was irrelevant. What mattered was that the Avenger performed its mission better than any contemporary torpedo bomber. It delivered ordnance, accurately survived defensive fire, and brought crews home. That was enough. The whistling sound of the R-2600 engine at full power, the rumble of 8 rockets launching simultaneously, the thud of depth charges exploding underwater, these sounds defined the Avenger's presence. Japanese submariners heard depth charges and knew an Avenger had found them. German U-boat captains heard the same sounds and knew the hunter-killer groups were closing in. American sailors heard those sounds and knew their air support had arrived. That is the Avenger's story. Not the most glamorous aircraft, not the fastest, not the most maneuverable, but the most capable torpedo bomber of World War II, the aircraft that replaced a disaster with competence, that proved versatile enough to excel at missions its designers never anticipated, that survived to become legendary not through individual heroics, but through consistent professional performance over 4 years of continuous combat. The unflappable Avenger. The bomber that shrugged off damage that would destroy other aircraft, that flew missions no other bomber could fly, that gave 3-man crews the tools and protection they needed to survive the most dangerous missions in naval aviation. That was the measure of success. That was the legacy. That was why the Avenger deserves to be remembered as one of the great aircraft of World War II.